Vote counting has begun in Zimbabwe, even though polling stations continue to be open in some areas because of delays in getting ballots to polling stations yesterday. Meanwhile, the police have arrested at least 41 independent election monitors who they accuse of disrupting the election process. The monitors are from civil society groups. Well, earlier we spoke to Roslyn Hanzi, who's director of Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights.
Their relatives or to their legal representatives, in that they are formally advised of the charge upon arrest. So they were not advised of any charges. Late this afternoon, the lawyers were advised that they were being charged with violating the Electoral Act. Basically, the process.
So your suspicion is that these election monitors have been detained. You're alleging that's in preparation for the ruling party to declare any result void. Any result they don't like, void. That's your allegation.
We see this as an ongoing effort to ensure that any independent voices, any other information that is not in line with what the ruling party wants the world to know can actually be viewed as being held by people who are holding intentions to undermine the status of the ruling party. And in this case, they feel threatened that if there is any independent information that is verified, that is not in line with what they intend to release, then obviously that will affect the credibility of the information that the ruling party would want people to believe out there.
Roslyn Hanzi, their director of Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights, representing many of those monitors who've been arrested. I mentioned earlier the BBC has a live page on the Wagner story. We've also got one on the Trump story, his imminent court appearance in Georgia. We think he's in the air and on his way, and you can get more details on what is likely to happen when he turns up, including a potential mug shot. You can see that on the BBC website. That's it for this edition of NewsHour from me and the whole team here in London. Thanks for joining us.
I'm Ira Plato. On Science Friday, we wonder about the secrets of nature and meet the scientists finding the keys to the universe, like black hole maven Jan Levin.
I think it's really important as a scientist not to put a belief system first. The whole point is to explore the unknown.
Come explore with us. It's all on Science Friday from WNYC Studios.
It's 2 hours of scientific discovery each Friday from 1 to 3.
Your NPR source is KGOU Norman at 106.3 FM, KROU Spencer, Oklahoma City at 105.7 FM, KWOU Woodward at 88.1 FM, KQOU Clinton at 89.1 FM, and KOUA Ada at 91.9 FM. Together, a community-supported service of the University of Oklahoma Outreach.
We await a historic moment announcement today. A former president is set to turn himself in at a county jail in Georgia to be fingerprinted, photographed, and processed while facing criminal charges.
We'll have more details this Thursday, August 24th on All Things Considered from NPR News.
I'm Elsa Chang.
And I'm Ari Shapiro. Former President Trump skipped last night's Republican debate, but he did offer his own counter-programming.
I'm saying, do I sit there for an hour or 2 hours, whatever it's going to be, and get harassed by people that shouldn't even be running for president?
Also, the trial for 3 men accused of plotting to kidnap the governor of Michigan has begun.
The defendants walked up to the edge of violence. The evidence is going to show you that they supported 2 terrorists.
And authorities in Maui ask for patience as they continue trying to find bodies in the rubble.
First, these news headlines.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Speer. U.S. officials are saying a preliminary assessment has found a plane crash near Moscow likely claimed the life of Wagner militia group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin. Pentagon spokesman Brigadier General Patrick Ryder says contrary to some reports, they don't believe a surface-to-air missile brought down the business jet.
We don't have any information to indicate right now. The press reporting stating that there was some type of surface-to-air missile that took down the plane. We assess that information to be inaccurate.
Officials have said, though, they believe there was some type of explosion. The White House has declined to comment. Prigozhin founded and led the Wagner private military group, which staged a brief mutiny against Russian leadership in June. Former President Donald Trump has switched up his legal team ahead of his expected surrender in Georgia tonight. Georgia Public Broadcasting Stephen Fowler reports Trump is set to be booked at the Fulton County Jail after being indicted earlier this month for his alleged efforts to overturn the state results of the 2020 election.
As the racketeering case against former President Trump enters a new phase, he has a new head lawyer. Steve Sadow is a high-profile defense attorney known for defending rappers like Rick Ross and T.I. and for deep knowledge defending against the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO. Most recently, he secured a plea deal for rapper Gunna in the other big RICO case in Atlanta against the artist Young Thug. Trump is expected to surrender to the Fulton County Jail this evening. For NPR News, I'm Stephen Fowler in Atlanta.
Meanwhile, House Judiciary Committee Chair Jim Jordan says he is launching an investigation into the Fulton County DA, Fani Willis. Stephen Walsh reports Jordan is asking about coordination between state and federal officials.
Jordan's Wednesday letter to Willis demands information and communications between her office and Justice Department officials, including Special Counsel Jack Smith. It comes on the day former President Trump will surrender at the Fulton County Jail for processing on criminal charges related to the 2020 election. Jordan writes that Willis's indictment of Trump raises serious concerns about whether her case is politically motivated. Back in July, Willis told Georgia station WABE she has not coordinated with Jack Smith. Jordan gave a September 7th deadline for information to be turned over to the committee. Deirdre Walsh, NPR News.
T-Mobile is the latest big company with the jobs-cutting axe for wireless carrier announced plans that 5,000 jobs, roughly 7% of its workforce. Emails to employees, which were shared in a regulatory filing, the company says the layoffs will be carried out over the next 5 weeks. Workers across the country, particularly those in corporate and back office jobs. Wall Street is continuing with its up and down trading pattern. The Dow was down more than 1% today. The Nasdaq and the S&P fell by similar amounts. You're listening to NPR News in Washington.
At 4:04, it's sunny and 100 in Norman. I'm Deborah Shaw for KGOU. Oklahoma State University has covered windows on 2 of its biggest buildings with polka dots to protect birds. We get details from Oklahoma Public Media Exchange's Grayson Wheeler.
Up to 1 billion birds die each year after flying into windows. That's according to research from Scott Loss, who studied bird collisions across the country and on OSU's campus.
Some of the species that collide with buildings here in town on campus and around Oklahoma are in really steep decline.
As you'd expect, lots of birds die from hitting dazzling glass skyscrapers. But Loss says we shouldn't underestimate how much smaller buildings contribute to the death toll.
We have hundreds of millions of individual residences in this country, and even if each of those kills 1 or 2 birds per year on average, it adds up.
As part of a project spearheaded by Loss and his colleague Tim O'Connell, OSU paid $78,000 to cover its most collision-prone windows in a dotted film that lets birds know there's a hard surface there. In Oklahoma City, I'm Grayson Wheeler.
The Edmond Animal Shelter has fully reopened following a respiratory outbreak. The shelter closed June 9th due to the canine flu. The contagious upper respiratory disease has impacted many local shelters. Officials say during the closure, they intensified their cleaning process and had protocols in place to avoid cross-contamination. The shelter has also changed the process for meeting dogs. Right now, it's 100 in Oklahoma City, 97 in Woodward, and 99 in Clinton. I'm Deborah Shaw for KGOU.
For NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Walton Family Foundation, working to solve social and environmental problems to improve lives today and benefit future generations. More information at waltonfamilyfoundation.org.
Those people you hang out with, have brunch with, fight with, stand up at each other's weddings with. Did you choose those folk? Or are you besties with someone because you like the same rock band 20 years ago? For the next Snap Judgment, shut up, Rick. Snap Judgment. Do not listen.
Snap Judgment with host Glenn Washington this Friday evening at 8.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Ari Shapiro in Washington.
And I'm Elsa Chang in Culver City, California. Former President Trump said he will turn himself in at 7:30 p.m. Eastern this evening at the Fulton County Jail in Atlanta. Trump will be booked and have his photo taken and then leave the facility. He faces 13 felony counts in Georgia related to efforts to overturn the result of the 2020 presidential election. This is, of course, Trump's fourth indictment since this spring. And joining us now to talk about Trump's legal troubles is NPR Justice correspondent Carrie Johnson. Hey, Carrie.
Hey there.
Okay, so what's different to you, Carrie, about this case in Georgia compared to the other three cases that Trump's been indicted in?
This Georgia case is certainly bigger. There are 19 defendants in all. It's also more sprawling in terms of the racketeering charge that Trump and others face and the actions that are outlined, and the geography, because these charges mention not just activity in Georgia, but also some other swing states in 2020, including things like that fake elector scheme, the alleged pressuring of Georgia Secretary of State Raffensperger and former Vice President Mike Pence, allegations of tampering with voting machines in another part of Georgia, and then, of course, intimidating the election worker Ruby Freeman, who testified she had threats against her life.
Okay, well, with respect to the two federal cases against Trump, led by Special Counsel Jack Smith, what is the status of those two cases at this point?
Sure, the first case centers around war plans and other secrets the FBI found at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort. There, Trump is charged with reclaiming defense information and obstruction of justice for refusing to return papers that belong to the government. He now has two co-defendants in that case, his body man Walt Nauta and a Mar-a-Lago facilities manager named Carlos de Oliveira. A third man, an IT worker, changed his story to prosecutors after he got a new lawyer, an independent attorney with no financial ties to Donald Trump. That man told prosecutors Trump and the others allegedly tried to get him to destroy security footage. He's going to be a likely witness at the trial next year. And then also the second case relates to Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election in Washington, D.C. In that case, Trump wants a trial in 2026. Prosecutors say no way. They want to be ready in January 2024. And there's going to be a hearing here in D.C. on Monday where the judge is going to set a trial date.
Okay, so during this process, I mean, the former president has certainly tested the tolerance of the judiciary and maybe even of his own lawyers. I'm thinking here of Trump's social media posts, for instance. How is that spilling over into the courtrooms?
The judge in Washington, D.C., Tanya Chutkan, has already warned Donald Trump's lawyers some of his First Amendment rights need to yield to restrictions that come with being a criminal defendant in any case. She says that means not intimidating witnesses like Mike Pence and not tainting the jury pool. She says she's going to move up the trial date in D.C. if Trump keeps posting inflammatory language. And in Georgia, Trump's conditions of release are even tighter when it comes to talking outside of court. This could be a real test of the legal system, since Donald Trump may keep posting and talking on the campaign trail no matter what these courts are telling him.
That's right. Well, now, one of the people indicted along with Trump in the Georgia case is former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. I know that Meadows is asking to get his case moved to federal court. Let me ask you, what difference would that make? And could Trump
early next week in federal court in Georgia over Mark Meadows' bid to move his case into federal court. The district attorney in Fulton County, Fani Willis, says it's not. His actions in this case were not part of his job in the government at the time. Trump may well try to move his case to federal court too. Georgia may be more friendly to Donald Trump in federal court, but we're going to have to see what that court decides next week.
That is NPR's Carrie Johnson. Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you.
We don't know what caused a private plane to crash in Russia yesterday, killing all 10 people on board. We do know that Yevgeny Prigozhin was on the flight manifest. He led a coup attempt against Russian President Vladimir Putin in June. And today, Putin expressed condolences to the families of those killed in the plane crash. He reminisced about his long acquaintance with the head of the Wagner mercenary group and referred to Prigozhin in the past tense. So, was this Putin's revenge against the man who threatened his power? Fiona Hill is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, and she has worked as a White House advisor on Russia. She's also written extensively about Putin. Welcome back to All Things Considered.
Thanks so much, Ari. Great to be with you.
Let's start with two very basic questions. Do you believe that Prigozhin is dead? And do you believe that Putin was behind it?
Well, I think on both of those scores, the answer would be yes right now. I think there was something of a question about that until Putin made the comments that you yourself have just relayed to the audience here. There was all kinds of speculation bouncing around the internet, a lot of memes as well as, more serious analysis about, has he really gone? A lot of people wanting to kind of wait to comment until they had some sort of DNA evidence, for example. But, here you have Putin, as you said, referring to him in past tense, making some commentary on his past relationship with him. That's vintage Putin. And then the second, kind of question, which I'm sure that most other commentators have also agreed in the affirmative with, is was Putin behind it? Absolutely. You have to recall that 2 months ago, almost exactly to the moment that Prigozhin plummets from the sky in this plane, he was doing this crazy march towards Moscow, and in the course of which he shot down a plane, or his people shot down a plane with 13 Russian servicemen. And, within the Russian system, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and, a certain amount of vengeance, is baked in. So at this point, it wouldn't be just Putin and those immediate people around him who would want to see the demise of Yevgeny Prigozhin. There'd also be one from the uniformed military, certainly from the Air Force, some kind of accounting for what he did then.
Not to make light of someone's death, but does this seem a little bit in your face and crass for a KGB guy who is known to serve his enemies polonium-laced tea and help them out of open windows?
Well, this is the ultimate window, isn't it? It's the big window in the sky. So, you can put that into that same category. And of course it's crass. It's, deliberately showy. It's demonstrative. We also have to put this in the context of the poisoning of Alexei Navalny with polonium in his underpants, which, has an element of the absurd as well as the horrific about it. And of course, the brutal assassination of Boris Nemtsov on a bridge within sight of the Kremlin walls. So, this is par for the course, unfortunately, in Russia. Many people have referred repeatedly to silver Russian death syndrome and all of these gruesome ways in which people meet their end at the hands of the state and people related to it. It's meant to be like that to get attention, everyone's attention at home and abroad, so that we're just all fully cognizant of what Russia is capable of, at least the people who are ruling Russia are capable of.
The coup attempt was seen as a serious blow to Putin's hold on power. Do you think this restores him to the former level of strength?
Well, look, it's something that people have been anticipating all along, and I think there has been a lot of caution from all kinds of people who watch events in Russia very closely, basically warning, for some time now, don't count Putin out. And this is his message to domestic critics, to all of the international community, don't count me out. And, the fact that he waited, for 2 months, and I'm sure we'll find out more information about this as we go along, really emphasizes that. Again, this is Putin is trying to project right now, is a man who can do things on his own timescale.
Yeah. Prigozhin had this massive private army at his disposal, and so what do you think the mercenaries of the Wagner Group do now?
The Wagner Group has served many purposes in terms of its mercenary and mythical status, and real things that they've done, and then the propaganda and scare factor effects that have been surrounding it. And what I would imagine is it gets reconstituted in some form. So I would just say, watch this space, and certainly there will be a great desire of the state to pick up the very well trained and experienced servicemen, the contract forces of the Wagner Group. In fact, that is one of the factors that already precipitated the whole debacle and spectacle of Prigozhin's putsch 2 months ago, was already the reports that Kremlin and the Defense Ministry were trying to take all of the Wagner forces into the regular uniformed military.
And so do you think the Wagner Group gets reconstituted under the umbrella of the Russian armed forces, or in a way that could continue to pose a threat?
Well, it won't be reconstituted in a way that poses a threat to Putin in terms of the plans of the Kremlin to reconstitute it, but we can be sure that there will be some reorganization and some way of trying to use the same off-the-books, although we now know that it's completely on-the-books methods, using mercenary fighters and more flexible forces in some way. So I think, the Russians have seen that this is pretty effective and can be very efficient and, kind of a totally different way of doing things, but there will probably be much more of a desire to have a tighter grip on future forces by the Central Defense Ministry and by people in the Kremlin, rather than giving them basically a loose rein, longer leash, as was the case with Wagner. However, there may still be some threats to Putin from people associated with the Wagner Group. So I would also suggest that we watch very closely, to see what happens next in terms of other assassinations, mysterious disappearances. We've heard about Surovikin, the general who was close to Prigozhin, being demoted. Let's, watch his fate. There could be a lot of clearing up here, which has happened again repeatedly over the last few decades under the Putin regime in Russia.
Clearing up, quite a euphemism. Fiona Hill is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. Thank you very much.
No, thank you so much, Eric.
It's 18 minutes after 4 o'clock. You're listening to All Things Considered on KGOU. Still ahead, the first wave of destruction to Black Wall Street happened in 1921, but continued in the following decades, including when a section of I-244 was built through the Greenwood District.
The Biden administration, the Infrastructure Act, had to do with reconnecting community, and they had good sense to address the issue of the wrong that was done by highways and cut through black communities.
A conversation with State Representative Regina Goodwin about the future of Greenwood, coming up in about 20 minutes. Checking on the afternoon commute in the metro, a crash is reported on southbound I-35 just before the I-240 junction. That is affecting traffic on I-35. It's backed up to about South 59th Street at this hour. Another backup is at I-44 and State Highway 66. Not much break from the heat tonight. The forecast is calling for lows around 80. The dangerous heat is back tomorrow. We can expect sunshine and highs around 102. Heat index values up to 105 are possible. Right now it's 100 in Oklahoma City, 100 in Norman, 97 in Woodward.
I'm Deepa Fernandez. A new parent support group has started in Florida for parents of LGBTQ+ kids as the state imposes new restrictions in public schools there.
We wanted to help galvanize all of the parents who are waking up to the harm of what the DeSantis administration has inflicted on their children.
That's next time on Here and Now.
This Friday at noon on KGOU, your NPR source.
Support for NPR comes
news from this station and from Procter & Gamble, maker of Metamucil, a fiber supplement containing psyllium, a plant-based fiber for trapping and removing waste in the digestive system, designed to be taken every day. More at metamucil.com. And from Workday, an enterprise management cloud focused on providing organizations with a system to continuously plan for all what-if scenarios. Workday, the finance, HR, and planning system for a changing world.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Ari Shapiro.
And I'm Elsa Chang. On Maui, authorities are pleading with the public to be patient as forensics teams have now been working for about 2 weeks trying to find bodies after the deadly wildfire. 49 of the more than 100 found dead so far have now been identified. But as NPR's Kirk Sigler reports, teams are making slow progress due to how hot the fires burned.
Commander Frank Sebastian is leading a federal team of more than 24 pathologists, forensic dentists, and coroners who have mobilized here from around the U.S. to help the overwhelmed Maui County Coroner's Office. It's a huge challenge trying to make IDs when the fire incinerated so much evidence.
In this case, that's a pretty difficult task due to the condition of the remains. When you're dealing with, with burns, you have a lot of destruction of tissue, and it becomes a very painstaking process to kind of reassemble that.
If they're lucky, they have DNA samples to work off or dental records given to the teams by families of those who are unaccounted for. Commander Sebastian sounds stoic and matter-of-fact, but he knows things here are grim.
Those of us that have been involved in this type of response over the years, we've been to Katrina, we've been to other wildfires, but this is a very devastating response.
Now, the majority of the burned area has been searched, but teams are still working through some of the bigger buildings. Not even a few hundred yards from where Sebastian is talking to us. Lahaina, you can see the devastation, twisted down power lines, only the cement elevator shafts left standing from what appears to have been an apartment building. Just charred remains and rubble from here at least a mile or so down to the sea itself, and it still smells like smoke and ash right here where I'm standing.
We were here since the 8th on the night of the fire. We were here, we landed, boots on ground, we were around 2100.
Sergeant Manuel Soco is with a U.S. Army search and extraction team. They've been working more than 14 straight days now. They cleared debris in front of the K9 units, the dogs that are trained to then go in and search for bodies. Soco is from Maui. His extended family lost their homes, as did several guys on his team. But the work must go on.
We're pretty resilient, high morale. We always support each other.
The boss, Lieutenant Ryan Edgar, who's usually based on Oahu, says Soco is being humble.
Myself and members of the team are experiencing things that you don't typically experience.
This is stressful, and these guys are working in dangerous situations in a place that a lot of them call home. But he says they have a lot of counselors around to talk to while they do this difficult job. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Edgar knows so many fire survivors here are still desperate for some news.
We're here to support the people of Lahaina. The best we can do is help bring closure to them by identifying victims, as many of them as we can.
Maui's police chief this week said that some victims may never be accounted for. That's not surprising to Kurt Hanthorn, who was standing in a long line at the post office in Lahaina picking up his mail for the first time in 2 weeks.
7 of my friends died in the fires, and I'm sure that'll increase as time goes on. It's hard to process, it's hard to focus on what we need, what I need to do every day. Honestly, I gotta write a note to remind myself to bathe.
Hanthorn is shaken, but also frustrated that some of his neighbors are getting ugly on social media.
Pointing blame, it's the electric company's fault, it's the county's fault, it's Joe Biden's fault, it's everybody's fault. They want an easy answer, and the fact of the matter is I saw it from beginning to end, and it moves so fast, like a blowtorch.
And the recovery here, whether it's searching for loved ones or just removing debris, will be anything but fast. Kirk Sigler, NPR News, Maui.
The The dog days of summer bring a movie about a girl's complicated summer. The film is called Scrapper, and critic Bob Mondello says that's a pretty good description of the child at its center.
Even if her pal Ali is something less than the world's best lookout, 12-year-old Georgie is quite an accomplished bicycle thief.
Hi, sorry, that's my bike.
And a bit of a con artist.
Oh, hi there. We were just making sure that all of these bikes were road safe. Oh, yours isn't, by the way.
Since Georgie's single mom died a few months back, she's been fending for herself, stealing bikes for rent money, while fending off Britain's social services, with an assist from a somewhat reluctant convenience store clerk.
Josh, could you do me one favour?
No more voice recordings.
Oh, but you're so good at them.
What do you want me to say?
Georgie is doing great at school, thanks.
Georgie's doing great at school, thanks.
Say it like you mean it, then.
Georgie's doing great at school, thanks.
Oh, that's amazing. That was so good. We are thinking of getting a hamster.
When social workers call, this allows Georgie to put her uncle, Winston Churchill, on the phone.
We're thinking of getting a hamster.
I mean, great. Yeah. Good for you, good for you. How's Georgie getting on?
We are eating spaghetti bolognese today.
I find that cheers me up, yeah.
Considering she's just lost her mom, Georgie, played with pluck to spare by first-timer Lola Campbell, seems resilient and self-sufficient on her own. There are little tells she's not okay. Her mom's mug still untouched. The sofa cushions never moved from the way she liked them. But Georgie's read up and figures she's gotten through denial, anger, and bargaining, and just has 2 stages of grief to go to a stranger across her back wall.
What are you doing in my garden?
Who's Susan?
Who's asking?
Jason. Your dad.
The dad who disappeared about the time Georgie was born.
You living on your own then?
No.
I'll come in for a chat.
Get out!
Right, so I'll tell the social there's a 12-year-old living on her own, shall I?
He actually doesn't seem a bad sort, as played by lad-like Harris Dickinson. And soon he's cooking. Georgie loses a tooth on some crusty garlic bread, and cleaning, and inevitably arguing.
What are you here for now?
I told you, I heard about your mum passing and I wanted to get to know you.
12 years? How come you didn't want to know me 12 years ago?
Because we were young, like we weren't getting along. She told me to leave.
You're a liar.
I ain't surprised no one stuck around for you, you know that?
Rough start, but Jason's a decent lookout, and he knows about filing off bike serial numbers. Think Fagin to Georgie's artful dodger. I mean, trust him, not even when she's sleeping.
What are you doing?
What are you awake for?
Are you nicking my money?
I was looking for your tooth.
Why would I put my tooth underneath my pillow?
For the tooth fairy.
What?
Put your tooth under the pillow and then the tooth fairy gives you a couple of quid, don't she?
Does she?
Yeah.
She's never done that before.
Really?
She must owe me like 20 quid then.
Always working the angles is Georgie. First-time writer-director Charlotte Regan makes it clear that the title Scrapper is meant to apply to both the main characters. Her pastel kitchen sink drama is sort of an adolescent coming-of-age story turned upside down. Jason's the one who needs to grow up and be a father so that Georgie can finally let go and be a kid. I'm Bob Mondello.
This is NPR News.
State Impact Oklahoma on KGOU, sponsored by Oklahoma Contemporary, featuring Art Now, The Soul is a Wanderer, an exhibition that draws inspiration from a line in Joy Hartnell's poem, A Map to the Next World. More at oklahomacontemporary.org.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, supporting stations and activities that strengthen service to communities. On the web at cpb.org.
In Georgia, one by one, those charged with a conspiracy to illegally keep Donald Trump in power turned themselves in. In Wisconsin,
I've had enough already tonight of a guy who sounds like ChatGPT standing up here.
8 Republican candidates duke it out on stage, absent the party's leading man. Lots to talk about on the Friday News Roundup, next time on 1A.
Catch the Friday News Roundup
U.S. Silk Road is quickly degrading.
It's kind of sad to see the weaponry under our eyes.
We'll have that story and more after these headlines.
Live from NPR News in Culver City, California, I'm Dwayne Brown. Former President Donald Trump is set to turn himself into authorities in Fulton County, Georgia later this evening. NPR's Jacqueline Diaz has more on what to expect.
Unlike in the other criminal cases involving Trump, the former president will have a mugshot taken as he's processed. He is also expected to pay bond, just like every other defendant in Fulton County. On Monday, a judge approved an agreement that set Trump's bond at $200,000. The former president is facing 13 felony charges for his efforts to overturn the 2020 election results in Georgia. So far, more than half of the 18 co-defendants in this case have turned themselves in to Fulton County ahead of a Friday deadline. This is the fourth criminal case facing Trump ahead of the 2024 election. Jacqueline Diaz, NPR News.
In Hawaii, Maui County is suing the state public utility company there over the fires that leveled the historic town of Lahaina more than 2 weeks ago, killing at least 115 people. And an unknown number of residents still remain missing. NPR's Greg Allen says several lawsuits have been filed against the utility company.
Hawaiian Electric is working to restore power, but at the same time is facing tough questions about its possible role in starting the fire. Some residents in West Maui, including some who have videos, say they saw fires started by energized downed power lines. Several lawsuits have been filed, including one by Maui County, that cite the company for negligence.
That's NPR's Greg Allen. The suit says the utility had a duty to properly maintain and repair its transmission lines and other equipment, including keeping vegetation properly trimmed around utility poles to prevent contact with overhead power lines. The lawsuit cited other major utility fires in California that were sparked during hot periods. On Wall Street, stocks finished lower today. The Dow was down 300 points. This is NPR.
From the KGOU studios in Norman, I'm Deborah Shar. For 3 consecutive days, Union Public Schools in Tulsa has faced bomb threats linked to posts from state leadership. On Thursday, a threat was sent to multiple media outlets for 4 addresses in the district, including Ellen Ochoa Elementary. Deputy Superintendent John Federline says so many threats are unprecedented.
Ochoa is a building of over 1,000 children from pre-K through 5th grade. It's unconscionable to think that someone would threaten to harm any of those kids.
State Superintendent Brian Walters made a social media post criticizing Ochoa's librarian for being woke. Officials in the district didn't name Walters. They say his rhetoric is creating chaos. Federline says police are still investigating the bomb threats. Extreme heat and no rain have resulted in drought quickly making a comeback. We get the latest on the situation from KGOU's Nick Daniels.
Drought has more than doubled in just a month. The most significant increase is south of Interstate 40. State climatologist Gary McManus says south central Oklahoma is the second driest it's been in more than a century. Lack of rain and extreme heat is leading to a flash drought situation. Fire danger has also increased dramatically in southern and southwestern Oklahoma. McManus says a lot of vegetation has died or gone dormant in that region of the state. There is a chance for some rain early next week as a cold front moves in. However, McManus says it doesn't appear to be drought-busting moisture, but it will give us a break from the heat, dropping highs back into the upper 80s and low 90s. I'm McDaniels.
And no break from the heat today. Right now it's 100 in Norman, 99 in Ada, 99 in Clinton. I'm Deborah Shar. This is All Things Considered on KGOU, your NPR source.
Rafael Lamarine traveled from Tijuana, Mexico to Williamsport, Pennsylvania. He went for his son.
I'm grateful to God because He gave me the opportunity. I'm so happy.
Going to the Little League World Series. Morning edition from NPR News.
Start the day with Morning Edition on KGOU this Friday and each weekday morning from 5 to 9.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Ooma, a cloud-based phone service for any size business with an automated virtual receptionist, video meetings, and other features to connect to customers and coworkers anywhere at ooma.com/NPR. And from Procter & Gamble, maker of ZzzQuil Pure Z's gummies, designed with melatonin for occasional sleeplessness to help people fall asleep naturally. Learn more at ZzzQuil.com. This is NPR.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Elsa Chang in Culver City, California.
And I'm Ari Shapiro in Washington. It was a tale of two Republican primaries last night. The GOP held its first debate in Milwaukee, hosted by Fox News. Candidates talked about everything from the economy and foreign policy to abortion and crime.
8 Republican candidates have qualified and have chosen to be here on our debate stage tonight.
Of course, former President Donald Trump chose not to be there. The frontrunner released his own counter-program on social media site X. An interview with former Fox News personality Tucker Carlson.
And I'm saying, do I sit there for an hour, 2 hours, whatever it's going to be, and get harassed by people that shouldn't even be running for president? Should I be doing that?
The interview was a direct shot both at Fox News and the party establishment, targets Trump has publicly feuded with in the past. For a breakdown of these dueling Republican narratives, we're joined by NPR's David Folkenflik and Domenico Montanaro. Good to have you both here.
Hey, Ari, good to be here.
Domenico, to start with the debate, 8 Republicans on stage without Trump. What did that look like?
I mean, it was a little weird. It was weird to see what a GOP primary might look like if Trump decided not to run for another term and wouldn't be part of this primary. You know, it was maybe even odder, though, to see that then in this debate, in the absence of Trump, that it was dominated by Vivek Ramaswamy. You know, a guy who's 38 years old, former tech CEO, not a household name in politics before this campaign. He really found himself center stage because he's polling third, even though that's only around 10%, so not very much. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis was supposed to be the guy. You know, he was supposed to be the principal alternative to Trump, but his campaign's really been sputtering. He was largely ignored during the debate. The other candidates wound up mostly targeting Ramaswamy, and that included Nikki Haley, the former Trump UN ambassador. She got into it with Ramaswamy over foreign policy. Overall, she had a pretty good night, but she's been lagging when it comes to money, hasn't gotten much attention for her campaign since the early weeks of it.
And meanwhile, on the social media site formerly known as Twitter, Donald Trump was going one-on-one with Tucker Carlson. David, what did that look like?
Well, I'd say there are two elements we should pay attention to. Let's first look at the content of it. Tucker Carlson was there, genial, incredibly warm. I think Timothy O'Brien, one of the chroniclers of Trump over the years, basically called it like a frat boy rapport. And he set him up with one softball after another. But if you really drilled down the content of the nihilist, it was almost as though he was goading Trump into embracing the idea that violence was imminent on the political scenes. Let's play a couple clips that compresses several of the questions at once.
Do you think it's possible that Epstein is killed? Are you worried that they're going to try and kill you? So what's next after, trying to put you in prison for the rest of your life? That's not working. So, don't they have to kill you now?
A lot of talk of killing.
Yeah, again and again with the idea of violence and politics being in the same sphere. So that's the content of it. And also the context of it. Tucker Carlson is a guy who was ousted by Fox from his hit primetime program last spring, just days after Fox had to pay almost $500 million because several of its hosts embraced Trump's lies about the 2020 election, the claim of fraud. Carlson's trying to say, I'm going to be relevant. I'm going to still have a voice in conservative politics. I'm going to make money. Here's how I'm going to do it. Not by accident. He started it 5 minutes before time, trying to upstage Fox and giving Trump an opportunity to go after Fox as well.
And back in Milwaukee, there was an expectation that Trump's absence would dominate the debate. I mean, Fox News host and moderator Bret Baier called Trump the elephant that is not in the room. So, Domenico, how much did his absence define the evening?
Yeah, I mean, the air of Trump clearly was dominant, but for almost the entire first hour, he wasn't really mentioned at all. It was like the bizarro universe of the GOP primary, but then we were all brought back to reality when they did start to talk about Trump. And at one point, the moderator, Bret Baier, one of the moderators, had to turn around and scold the crowd, telling them, let's just get through this. Like, in other words, none of us wants to be talking about this. I know you don't want to hear criticism of Trump, but we have to, so come on. It was really interesting, though, with Trump not there. You did see some of the risk of him not being there because everyone except Ramaswamy backed up former Vice President Mike Pence for, they said, doing the right thing on January 6th and not bowing to Trump's pressure to try and throw out the election results, even if somewhat reluctantly. Here's this exchange between Pence and DeSantis.
I think the American people deserve to know whether everyone on this stage agrees that I kept my oath to the Constitution that day. There's no more important duty. So answer the question.
I've answered this before.
So yes.
Why are we? He might did his duty. I got no beef with him. But here's the thing: is this what we're going to be focusing on going forward? The rehashing of this? I'll tell you, the Democrats would love that.
Well, and they weren't focused mostly on that. That was just one segment. But you have to imagine that exchange would have gone very differently if Trump was there.
And where Trump was on X, a lot of people were watching. And so, David, if this was meant to be counter-programming, was it a win for Trump, for Carlson? How do you rate it?
Well, look, the views count on X, or it used to be Twitter, is impressive. But that number, 235 million when you last look, is incredibly misleading and inflated. It's really almost, if you stumble across it, scrolling through it on the street or in an elevator, you're going to be counted as well. But this helps Carlson stay relevant, although really more so in the lead up to the debate rather than after. I don't think a lot of people are talking about moments from that interview as incredibly integral to our understanding of what's about to happen in this election. But step back, it allowed Trump to retain media attention in the build-up to a debate in which he was not going to pay attention. And think of the other big story today. Donald Trump is being processed for felonies in Fulton County, Georgia, over trying to block the due election proceeds in the state of Georgia. He gets to both kind of dampen attention to the debates before it and after.
And from the perspective of not politics but television, how did Fox do in the battle for eyeballs?
In the battle for eyeballs, actually, I think they significantly beat expectations. I think it was about 12.8 million people, almost 13 million people if you combine both on Fox proper and on Fox Business Network. That's really on the high end of debates not involving Donald Trump. Yet there were moments where you saw the two hosts, Martha MacCallum and Brett Baier, really struggling to contain candidates who themselves weren't Donald Trump, not themselves steamrollers. Here's a little listen of what it sounded like.
We're going to do it 2020. Same question in a presidential election in 2020.
I will answer that. I will answer that.
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Quick answer.
You guys have to get control of this. Everybody's going to get a chance to get
Listen,
control
we're
of
getting
this
control
debate.
of the debate. This is a lightning round, not rolling thunder.
Great line. I'm not sure they did quite get control of the debate, but for a dominant player like Fox in conservative circles, he didn't really have control even of these lesser tier of candidates.
And so, Domenico, what does this split screen that we saw tell us about the current state of the Republican Party?
Well, I mean, there's still Trump and there's everyone else. Even though Trump didn't get the kind of attention he would have liked to have gotten out of his interview on X, it's been pretty clear. It was glaring last night. Trump is betting that this party of one is him, and with or without Fox News' help, figuring that he could do it himself.
NPR's Domenico Montanaro and David Folkenflik. Thank you both.
You're welcome.
You bet.
You're listening to All Things Considered from NPR News.
Stadium Packed Oklahoma on KGOU, sponsored by OG&E. We energize life using technology to enhance the grid. Learn more at OGE.com.
This is member-supported KGOU. Tulsa's North Peoria Church of Christ used to call Greenwood home. That was before I-244 displaced it and cut through historic Black Wall Street. State Impact's Brittany Cordera talked with State Representative Regina Goodwin, who represents the area and attends the church. Goodwin talked about the area's legacy and a planning grant to study the removal of the expressway.
I'm curious to know, how did North Peoria Church of Christ get involved with this kind of environmental justice work?
Cody Brandt is someone very involved in community. And his work in college, actually, his thesis had to do with highways and community. And actually, he first approached me about the idea of I-244, the potential for that being removed, and the Infrastructure Act. And from that initial conversation, I began to do research and saw that this had occurred in Milwaukee and Syracuse and Rochester, New York. We're talking about some 20 years prior, right, for Milwaukee, and saw that it was very plausible and doable. If you can construct a highway, you can deconstruct it. And when I saw then that the Biden administration specifically had our dollars that could be used to remove highways that had cut through Black communities in particular, this was a project that I thought was worthy of research.
Recently, a Tulsa reporter from KWGS, his name's Ben Abrams, he attended a press conference where a sign was unveiled to honor Kavin Ross, who served on the Public Oversight Committee searching for graves from the 1921 massacre. His brother, Edward, shared that the city can honor the massacre victims by knocking down the expressway. I'm wondering if you could tell me more about the connection between reparations for the Tulsa race massacre victims and the removal of I-244.
Clearly, we talked about the destruction that happened in the race massacre in 1921 to a community, 1,256 homes, the businesses that were destroyed, the lives no longer with us, the generational wealth. We're talking about murder, right? And so you saw that first wave of destruction. The second wave of destruction occurred on Greenwood through the highway, which then it came in and destroyed homes and livelihoods, right, in terms of businesses. The connection, one, is that Greenwood is the community that continues to be disadvantaged. The people of Greenwood, the historic residents. But I also think there's a difference between good policy and reparations. The Biden administration, the Infrastructure Act, has to do with reconnecting the community. And they had the good sense to address the issue of the wrong that was done by highways that cut through Black communities. Reparations are due, no question. Reparations are due. But understand this, reparations has to do with generational wealth. Reparations has to do with victim compensation for the victims and for descendants.
Tell me a little bit about what your dream for Greenwood looks like.
Should there be partial removal of I-244, the acres that would open up some 30 acres, you could then repurpose that land. You could then see good affordable housing and small businesses replenished in that area. That ideally for the historic residents, that they might benefit, that there might be ownership through community land trust that would stem the gentrification that exists right now. Those are the kinds of things that we need to address if we're going to really talk about reconnecting the community. And that is something that is very tangible, and it could happen if you have cooperation of certain entities. The state of Oklahoma, the Oklahoma Department of Transportation, the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority, the city of Tulsa. I'm talking about what's best for the Greenwood area.
That was State Impact's Brittany Cordera speaking with Representative Goodwin about the revitalization of the Greenwood District. This is All Things Considered on KGOU.
In the 1950s, paranoia gripped the nation.
The government was in the throes of a communist panic, and before long, it became a panic about LGBTQ people working in government.
Are there homosexuals in government agencies? And do they pose a threat to national security?
On the next Through Line from NPR,
The Lavender Scare.
Hear Through Line this Thursday evening at 8.
I'm Stephen Dubner on the next Freakonomics Radio. If you know Rahm Emanuel as the famously combative political operative and former mayor of Chicago, it may be surprising to learn that he is now the U.S. ambassador to Japan.
America's #1 ally.
Emanuel also has some strong feelings about Japan's neighbor, China.
I'm not going to play your fool anymore.
That's next time on Freakonomics Radio.
Hear Freakonomics Radio this Saturday morning at 11.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Ari Shapiro.
And I'm Elsa Chang. The trial for 3 men accused of aiding in a plot to kidnap the governor of Michigan is underway now in northern Michigan. As Interlochen Public Radio's Michael Livingston reports, attorneys gave their opening statements and prosecutors are now presenting their case.
Eric Molitor and twin brothers William and Michael Knoll are the last 3 defendants to be tried for the unsuccessful plot to abduct the governor from her vacation home. 14 people were arrested and charged in 2020. 9 have since been convicted, while 2 others were acquitted. Prosecutors argue Molitor and the Knoll brothers provided some form of material support for the plot.
The defendants walked up to the edge of violence. The evidence is going to show you that they supported 2 terrorists.
That's Michigan Assistant Attorney General William Ralston. The 2 terrorists he names are Adam Fox and Barry Croft, the convicted ringleaders who helped bring these defendants further into the fold. Ralston played video clips of the men shooting guns in training exercises and audio of a trip to surveil Governor Gretchen Whitmer's cabin in Elk Rapids. However, the defense said that participating in militia activities, which usually involves paramilitary training, is not a crime. Christina Nunzio represents William Knoll.
Phil Knoll has a healthy mistrust of the government, and that alone is not a crime. And he's a firm believer in his Second Amendment rights, not only to bear arms, but for a well-regulated abortion.
But for FBI Special Agent Hank Hinkle, escalating toward violence. He was the first to testify today and helped oversee the use of undercover informants. He says this group crossed a line.
Obviously, there's freedom of speech. People can say whatever they want, but assessing their level of dangerousness, really what their actions say.
The informants he oversaw are likely to testify as the trial unfolds. Governor Whitmer has not commented on this case specifically, but she did speak out when arrests were made in 2020.
If you break the law, conspire to commit heinous acts of violence against anyone, we will find you. We will hold you accountable, and we will bring you to justice.
The trial in state court is expected to last about 3 weeks. For NPR News, I'm Michael Livingston in Bel Air, Michigan.
6 new nations are joining the group of emerging economies known as BRICS, which stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The announcement came on the last day of the summit in South Africa. The group has positioned itself as a counterweight to what it sees as U.S. dominance. Kate Bartlett reports from Johannesburg.
BRICS was already a politically and economically diverse group before expansion was announced, and is formidable in that it accounts for 40% of the world's population and about 25% of global GDP. The group has now added Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates. This was political analyst Stephen Bruce's take on the news they'll be joining in January 2024.
I think they're trying to build on the momentum that's been created. How new countries wanted to join the BRICS system. What that will do to the acronym is another question.
Relations between current members haven't always been easy. China and India are in a dispute over part of their border, and the combination of new members has also raised eyebrows. Iran and Saudi Arabia are old political foes, and there have also been tensions between Egypt and Ethiopia over a hydroelectric dam on the Nile. Many developing countries have long chafed against what they see as US imperialism and an unequal international system, and like the idea of a group challenging the status quo. No one's more pleased about that than China and Russia, which has been hit hard by sanctions over the Ukraine war. Here's President Vladimir Putin at the summit, joining by video link because an international criminal court warrant for his arrest made it impossible for him to travel to South Africa.
Some countries promote the hegemony, exceptionality, and the policy of the ongoing colonialism and neo-colonialism.
This week, while the other bloc members voiced aspirations for peace, they fell short of condemning Russia in its invasion of Ukraine. For NPR News, I'm Kate Bartlett in Johannesburg.
More than 1,500 years ago, followers of Buddhism started painting art inside a string of caves threading through the desert of northwestern China. In some cases, they chiseled elaborate statues directly into the rock. These magnificent caves survived a millennia, but they face a new enemy, rain. NPR's Emily Fang brings us the story.
Wang Qingyu has dedicated his professional life to preserving the Wugao caves. More than 500 temples carved out of cave walls and elaborately painted starting in the 4th century. They're in China's Jiangyan, oases along the ancient Silk Road.
In the summers out in Dunhuang, the sun doesn't set until 9 or 10 in the evening, and so a few of the younger researchers and I would spend the hours before dusk with the paintings in the caves. And that's how I grew to love them.
Wang was a young, promising researcher when he graduated in the 1980s, just years after China ended a decade of political turmoil called the Cultural Revolution. During that time, schools were shut down, and teachers and academics beaten and imprisoned, and there wasn't much conservation expertise left in the country. So Wang was drafted to protect the Dunhuang Caves and grottos because of his chemistry background. He spent a decade repairing flaking paint and removing dust. But in the last 3 decades, it's rain he's most afraid of.
This increased rain brings floods. There used to be a wide river with many grand trees in front of the Wukao caves, but a large amount of underground water now sinks into the caves as well.
And the rain dissolves minerals in the caves to create a caustic, paint-destroying chemical process. Normally, this part of China is extremely dry. It only used to rain about 1.5 inches a year. But now, more rain comes down each year, even as the storms themselves become less frequent, meaning flash flooding and mudslides. China has invested considerably in restoration work in the cave paintings, as depicted in this documentary from the Research Institute Dunhuang Academy. But the threat from climate change-induced flash flooding is accumulating. Events in the environmental organization Greenpeace says are literally dissolving the cave paintings. Here's Li Zhao with Greenpeace's office in Beijing.
The paintings start to experience some processes of precipitating and build-up of salt on the wall painting's surface and makes the painting flaking and detachment.
Li collaborated with Wang in China's National Meteorological Administration on the new research. She says humidity reaches as high as 93% inside some caves. Museums usually keep humidity around 40% to protect artwork. The Dunhuang Caves, however, are not inside the confines of a museum. And what saddens Li is not that the Dunhuang Cave paintings will one day be reclaimed by time.
Most people who are interested in the cultural heritage, they kind of know that the cultural heritage will someday completely disappear.
But rather, what is tragic to her is how quickly the art is fading at our watch.
And this may happen just in 1 or 2 generations. So it's kind of sad to see them withering under our eyes.
This time, this may end in just 1 generation. Emily Fang, NPR News, Taipei.
And you're listening to All Things Considered from NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Procter & Gamble, maker of Align Probiotic, a daily supplement designed by gastroenterologists to help relieve occasional bloating, gas, and abdominal discomfort. More at alignprobiotics.com. From Heather Sturt-Haga and Paul G. Haga, supporting African Wildlife Foundation, working to ensure wildlife and wild lands thrive in modern Africa. Learn more at awf.org. From the Wallace Foundation, working to develop and share practices that can improve learning and enrichment for young people and the vitality of the arts for everyone. Ideas and information at wallacefoundation.org. And from listeners like you who donate to this NPR station.
This is KGOU 106.3 FM, KROU Spencer, Oklahoma City at 105.7 FM, KWOU Woodland at 88.1 FM, KQOU Clinton at 89.1 FM, KOUA Ada at 91.9 FM, K250AU Ada at 97.9 FM, K276ET Seminole at 103.1 FM, K286BZ Shawnee at 105.1 FM, and K295BL Chickasha at 106.9 FM. KGOU is your NPR source. Find out more about our digital and FM broadcast reach and services on our website at kgou.org.
It's a big place. We're not going to
suffer directly from the doses from this.
Japan is releasing treated radioactive water from the Fukushima nuclear power plant. Scientists say it's safe, but some locals are doubtful.
For Thursday, August 24th, this is All Things Considered. And I'm Elsa Kang. Last night, 8 of the GOP presidential candidates debated for the first time one major point of contention, aid to Ukraine to fight Russia.
I will have Europe pull their weight. Right now, they're not doing that.
In Mississippi, a federal court ruling this month would restore voting rights to as many as 30,000 people formerly convicted of felonies. The state is looking to appeal.
As a black woman, knowing the price is paid for us to be able to go and vote, then sign out the state. Right, turn up on
First, these news headlines.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Spear. Russian President Vladimir Putin is expressing his condolences for the families of the victims killed in a plane crash near Moscow yesterday. NPR's Charles Maines reports Putin stopped short of confirming Wagner chief Yevgeny Prigozhin was killed in the crash.
Looking somber as he delivered televised remarks, President Putin said initial reports suggested members of the Wagner mercenary group were aboard the plane when it crashed. Kremlin leader then praised Wagner's contributions to the war effort in Ukraine, saying they wouldn't be forgotten. He also spoke about his decades-long relationship with Wagner chief Yevgeny Prigozhin, referring to him in the past tense and calling him a talented person who'd made serious mistakes. Apparent reference to a rebellion launched by Prigozhin against the Russian military earlier this summer. Putin did not expressly confirm Prigozhin's death, but vowed an investigation into the crash would be carried out in full. Charles Maines, NPR News, Moscow.
Maui County is suing the Hawaiian Electric Company over wildfires that devastated the town of Lahaina, saying the utility failed to shut off power despite exceptionally high winds and tinder-dry conditions. Fast-moving fire earlier this month claimed the lives of at least 115 people, but more than 1,000 remain unaccounted for. There's no immediate comment from the utility. Witness accounts and video have indicated sparks from the downed power lines ignited fires. The utility poles snapped in the high winds. Former President Donald Trump is expected to turn himself into authorities at the Fulton County Jail in Atlanta tonight. Rahul Bali with member station WABE reports Trump will be booked on 13 felony charges in connection with his alleged efforts to overturn Georgia's 2020 election results.
The former president is expected to go through the standard arrest procedure, including being fingerprinted and photographed. The Fulton County Sheriff's Office has been regularly releasing booking photos of some of the other defendants that have already turned themselves in, including attorneys Rudy Giuliani and John Eastman. Trump also has to post a $200,000 bond, which requires him to not intimidate other defendants or witnesses, including on social media. All defendants have until noon Friday to turn themselves in. For NPR News, I'm Raul Bali in Atlanta.
The first Republican debate of the 2024 election was notable on a number of fronts. One, who didn't show up, and second, for performances by those who did. Frontrunner Donald Trump declined to show up, leaving the stage clear for others. That included Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and political newcomer entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy. Ramaswamy has moved up in the polls somewhat after his debate showing. Others on stage included former Vice President Mike Pence, former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, and former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. Wall Street continues with its up one day, down the next pattern. The Dow fell 373 points. The Nasdaq was down 257 points today. This is NPR.
At 4 minutes after 5 o'clock, it's 100 in Oklahoma City. I'm Deborah Shaw for KGOU. Tulsa Public Schools will stay under local control. The State Board of Education approved the district's accreditation status at a meeting today. We get more from State Impact's Beth Wallace.
Tulsa Public Schools is now accredited with 3 deficiencies, an upgrade from its former status decided last year when it was downgraded for allegedly violating a law that prohibits certain conversations on race and gender. Those deficiencies are submitting untimely reports, violating state codes on financial accounting, and the lack of financial transparency to school board members. The district must now present a monthly in-person review with 3 focuses: professional development over the science of reading, a corrective action plan for TPS schools with an F rating on the school card, and executing a plan to control against embezzlement, an issue at the heart of a current criminal investigation. State Superintendent Ryan Walters warned the district the options to pull accreditation or initiate state takeover are still on the table, but he doesn't feel TPS has improved enough.
I'm willing to do
over a mutual separation with Superintendent Deborah Gist, who announced she would step down in the hopes of staving off a state takeover. For State Impact, I'm Beth Wallace.
Right now it's 100 in Norman, 102 in Ada, 97 in Woodward. I'm Deborah Shar. This is All Things Considered on KGOU, your NPR source.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Katina Foundation, supporting the Asylum Seeker Advocacy Project, providing more than 100,000 asylum seekers in the U.S. with community and legal support. Learn more at asylum.news.
I'm Deepa Fernandez. A new parent support group has started in Florida for parents of LGBT+ kids as the state imposes new restrictions in public schools there.
We wanted to help galvanize all of the parents who are waking up to the harm the DeSantis administration has inflicted on their children.
That's next time on Here and Now.
This Friday at noon on KGOU, your NPR source.
It's All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Ari Shapiro in Washington.
And I'm Elsa Chang in Culver City, California. Former President Trump is en route to turn himself into a jail in Georgia. He faces 13 felony charges for failed efforts to overturn the state's 2020 presidential election. Trump has called these charges political persecution. Georgia Public Broadcasting Stephen Fowler is outside the Fulton County Jail in Atlanta. Hi, Stephen.
Hey there.
So set the scene for us where you are. What are you looking at?
So I am currently looking at one of the two entrances to the Fulton County Jail. I'm surrounded by a row of media. I drove in past protesters, both supporting and opposing former President Trump, parking next to a couple of Trump flags, for example. And there's a lot of police present. The already traffic-clogged roads of Atlanta are only going to get worse because several of them are already blocked off ahead of the motorcade. You know, it's not every day a former president gets booked into a county jail.
No, it is not every day that a former president gets booked at a county jail. But on that front, will he be treated differently from other criminal defendants who routinely get processed at that jail?
Well, yes and no. On the one hand, County Sheriff Pat Labat has said Trump will be treated the same, which means we should expect to see the first booking photo out of the 4 different indictments that he's done in the last 4 months. But he won't be led away in handcuffs or stay there any longer than necessary. It could take about 30 minutes. That's definitely faster than most people who enter this jail. And like many, his lawyers have negotiated a bond agreement beforehand with the DA's office, $200,000. It also includes heightened restrictions on witness intimidation. It's still an unprecedented event to have a former American president booked into a local jail, even with this streamlined processing.
Unprecedented indeed. Okay, let's just remind listeners why Trump is there in the first place. He already faces charges for trying to overturn the 2020 election, but at the federal level, these are those local charges. Just walk us through this case.
Well, Elsa, long story short, Bonnie Willis alleges that Trump was the center of a this conspiracy to illegally overturn the 2020 election loss in Georgia. Unlike the federal charges last month, the state level charges, one, under an expansive racketeering law and 18 other co-defendants. 2, it zeroes in on efforts to get state-level officials to illegally overturn the election results. And 3, he can't be pardoned by himself or anyone else other than a state-appointed pardons and parole board, but only after the end of the sentence.
These are state charges. Okay, all 19 defendants in this case are supposed to turn themselves in by tomorrow afternoon. What should we expect next at that point?
Well, this is a very complicated case, and there's a fire hose of developments coming nonstop. Here's a couple of them that illustrate how complex it'll be with 19 different people, 19 different sets of lawyers, and 19 different levels of involvement. For example, there's a federal court hearing Monday where former Trump Chief of Staff Mark Meadows is seeking to have his case removed from state court and dismissed altogether, while another defendant, lawyer Kenneth Cheeseborough, wants a speedy trial. The district attorney says okay and is now asking for all 19 people, including Trump, to have that trial by the end of October. It'll be up to a judge to decide that. And Donald Trump has a new lawyer leading the case in Georgia. He's an accomplished defense attorney named Steve Siegel, who's defended rappers and racketeering cases, including the other high-profile RICO case playing out in Atlanta right now with hip-hop artist Young Thug. That's just a small look at what will be happening moving forward.
Rappers and racketeering. I like it. That is Georgia Public Broadcasting. Broadcasting, Stephen Fowler. Thank you so much, Stephen.
Thank you.
$350 million gallons. That's how much radioactive wastewater Japan has stored at the now-defunct Fukushima nuclear power plant, which melted down after a massive earthquake and tsunami in 2011. The government began releasing some of that water into the Pacific Ocean today. International inspectors have approved the plan to release the water slowly over decades. Still, many people are concerned. NPR's Jeff Brumfield and Kat Lonsdorf are here to talk us through the science behind the decision. Good to have you both in the studio.
Hey, Ari.
Kat, you made a reporting trip to Fukushima in 2020. You went to the Daiichi nuclear power plant. Why is there so much radioactive water there?
So the water comes from a couple of sources. First, it's water that was used to cool the reactors when they melted down in 2011. But then they've also had to continue pumping water in to cool those same reactors. Even though they're offline and being decommissioned, you can't just turn a nuclear reactor off. And then there's also groundwater that's filtered into the site over the years. So this water keeps building up. It's being stored in these giant tanks right now. There are about 1,000 on the site. I went to see them when I was there, and they just stretch on for as far as the eye can see. And that was 3 years ago, so they're really running out of room now. Managing and storing that water safely has been a huge problem, which is why the government has been treating it to release it.
And Jeff, what does that actually mean to treat these 350 million gallons of water?
It all comes down to one word, which is filtration. The Japanese government has basically built the world's largest Brita filter. And what they're trying to do is basically remove as many of the radioactive elements as they can. So these are things like strontium and cesium, which are dangerous for humans and animals. And they can't get those down below government safety limits, but there is a radioactive isotope they can't get rid of. It's called tritium. Tritium is an isotope of hydrogen, and hydrogen is, part of H2O. It's part of the water itself. So they can't filter it, and that's something that's made this plant controversial. Now, it's just that tritium isn't the most dangerous radioactive element out there. It doesn't build up inside plants and animals, and it has a half-life of just 12 years as opposed to something like uranium-235, which sticks around for 700 million years. So it could be worse.
And Ari, I think some helpful context here is that for better or worse, functioning nuclear power plants around the world release tritium regularly for the reasons Jeff just explained. We haven't figured out a way to filter it out of water. So not to pile on, but this is happening all over the place. There are standards that have been set for it. And in some places it's happening at levels much higher than what we're seeing in this release.
And yet there is still local and regional objections, which we'll talk about in a moment. First, tell us how Japan is actually putting this water into the ocean.
There are a couple steps. First, they're going to dilute the radioactive water so that there's a lot less tritium in every drop. The government says that they will bring tritium levels to well below all safety limits. Then they're going to take that diluted water and pass it through a super long tunnel under the seafloor to a point probably close to Fukushima and the Pacific Ocean, and that will dilute it further. And like you said, Ari, they're not just dumping it all in. They're going to do this slowly. It's going to take decades to empty out those tanks.
You've both been talking with a lot of scientists about this plan. What are they telling you?
So generally, most scientists seem to agree that this will have a negligible impact on the environment if it's done to plan. I talked to Jim Smith. He's a professor of environmental science at Portsmouth University in the UK. He's been studying radioactivity in waterways impacted by nuclear waste for decades.
The risk is really, really, really low. And I would call it not a risk at all. We've got to, put radiation in perspective, and the planned release, if it's done properly, then the doses that people get and the doses that the ecosystem get just won't be significant, in my opinion.
But even if that's true, not all scientists think this is a good idea. I spoke to Ken Bisler at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. He worries about the precedent Japan sets by doing this, even though he agrees the ocean will dilute the radioactivity.
It's a big place. We're not going to suffer directly from the doses from this, but it's one of the many things we're adding to our ocean that if you have an alternative, we certainly should consider more fully. And I don't think that's been done in the past couple of years.
And Bissler's also worried that even small quantities of contaminants missed by that filtration system I mentioned could slowly accumulate in the sediments around the plant. That could cause problems for local fisheries down the road.
Anthony Kuhn was reporting from Fukushima yesterday, where people are worried. There have been protests in South Korea. China has banned seafood from the area. Are people overreacting?
No, I don't think people in Fukushima are overreacting at all. I mean, during and immediately after the disaster, the government and TEPCO, that's the company that runs the nuclear power plant, were both pretty deceitful with data and information. They've since apologized and are trying to be more transparent, but there's this deep distrust that's still there. And you know, Fukushima is a big fishing area. So even if scientists say that the fish from there is fine, if people around the world don't trust that and won't buy it, that's not good.
You know, there's a geopolitical side to this as well. There's a history of radioactive contamination in the Pacific. It was the site of nuclear testing during the Cold War, and many Pacific Island nations suffered the consequences. Ken Bissler's working with some of them, and you know, he told me the trauma runs deep. Some of these islands are still off limits. So the idea of a developed country using the Pacific to unload its radioactive wastewater just upsets quite a few people in principle.
NPR's Jeff Brumfield and Kat Lonsworth, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Before candidates even spoke during last night's Republican presidential debate, this song took the stage. Rich man knows the rich man, Lord knows they all just want to have total control. It's called Rich Men North of Richmond, and it's sung by a previously unknown artist named Oliver Anthony. The song is now topping the Billboard 100 chart. Dig into the lyrics and you'll find extremist narratives and references to conspiracy theories. Hear that conversation on Morning Edition from NPR News.
You're listening to All Things Considered from NPR News.
Good evening, I'm Deborah Ashar. You're tuned to member-supported KGOU. It's 5:18. Checking on metro highways, an accident is reported on northbound Broadway Extension and eastbound. Heavy traffic and some backups at this hour on I-40 starting at about North 23rd Street. The merge at State Highway 74 and 3, eastbound I-40 at Meridian, and also on I-35 south out of downtown and continuing through I-240. The National Weather Service says we can expect lows around 80 tonight. The excessive triple-digit heat continues Friday and again Saturday before we get a break. Highs around 102 tomorrow with heat index values as high as 105 are possible. Right now it's 101 in Oklahoma City, 103 in Ada, 102 in Norman. You're listening to All Things Considered on KGOU, your NPR source.
In Georgia, one by one, those charged with the conspiracy to illegally keep Donald Trump in power turned themselves in. In Wisconsin,
I had enough already tonight of a guy who sounds like ChatGPT standing up.
8 Republican candidates duke it out on stage, absent the party's leading man. Lots to talk about on the Friday News Roundup, next time on 1A.
Catch the Friday News Roundup this Friday morning from 9 to 11 on KGOU.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Dataiku, a platform for everyday AI to help organizations make AI part of their daily business, designed to elevate people to occasional bloating, gas, and abdominal discomfort. More at AlignProbiotics.com. This is NPR.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Ari Shapiro.
And I'm Elsa Chang. A federal court ruling earlier this month would allow as many as 30,000 formerly incarcerated people who were convicted of felonies to regain their voting rights in Mississippi. But as Mississippi Public Broadcasting's Michael McEwen reports, the state is hoping to overturn that decision on appeal.
Mississippians convicted of any one or two felonies are prohibited from voting, even after completing their sentences. Veronica Bilbo was previously convicted of a qualifying felony and has been released, but barred from voting for 4 years.
It's what we think of as a fundamental right, as a citizen. And then to have that taken away, when you've done your time, you've been productive, you had zero recidivism, and then, as a black woman, knowing the price we pay for us to be able to go and vote and find out what things like.
Early this month, a 3-judge panel said the Mississippi law was cruel and unusual punishment and in violation of the 8th Amendment. The majority said Mississippi stands as an outlier among other states that maintain lifetime felon voting bans. In 1974, the last time the U.S. Supreme Court considered the constitutional standing of such laws. 32 states had them. Today, the number is less than half that.
That's frankly very much the argument we made to the court.
Attorney John Youngwood represented 6 Mississippians who had their voting rights stripped.
The last time the Supreme Court had a case on this issue, the status of the laws in the country were very, very different. The vast majority of states would not permit a former felon to vote. There is now a growing consensus and a firm consensus in the country that forbidding people to vote for the rest of their lives for a crime they commit when they're very young is not appropriate.
The state of Mississippi has now appealed the decision, arguing it would, quote, inflict profound damage and widespread confusion. They want the full Fifth Circuit Court to rule. The earlier 3-judge panel featured 2 Democratic nominees, but the full court is often thought of as one of the most conservative in the country. That is cast doubt over the ruling's future. For NPR News, I'm Michael McEwen in Jackson, Mississippi.
Last night, 8 of the Republican candidates running for president took the debate stage for the first time, and while they agreed on a lot, one major point of disagreement was Russia's war on Ukraine. Here are candidates Vivek Ramaswamy, Ron DeSantis, and Chris Christie in a debate on the Fox News channel last night.
Mr. Ramaswamy, you would not support an increase of funding to Ukraine?
I would not, and I think that this is disastrous, that we are protected against an invasion across somebody else's border.
I will have Europe pull their weight. Right now they're not doing that.
If we don't stand up against this type of autocratic killing in the world, we will be next.
The elephant not in the room, as the moderator put it, was former President Donald Trump. And in an interview with Tucker Carlson, Trump criticized Biden's handling of the war.
That's a war that should end immediately, not because of one side or the other, because hundreds of thousands of people are being killed.
Let's talk about what this disagreement could mean for the people fighting and providing aid to the war. NPR's Brian Mann is in Ukraine, just east of Kharkiv, and NPR Pentagon correspondent Tom Bowman is here in the studio. Hi, guys.
Hey, Ari.
Hey there, Ari. Tom, how concerned are the war's supporters that skepticism of U.S. aid to Ukraine seems to be growing?
Well, right, Ari, we heard from that debate. There's a division within the Republican Party between internationalists like Nikki Haley, who support Ukraine and are concerned about Russian aggression spreading, and the so-called American First Wing, of course, led by former President Trump. There is concern among Ukraine backers that support could erode, especially on Capitol Hill. Republican Congressman Andy Harris, who, by the way, Ari, is co-chair of the Ukraine caucus, said recently the Ukrainian counteroffensive has failed, does not think Ukraine can win, and he's not sure he'll support more military aid. That has concerned Ukraine supporters like Congressman Adam Smith, the top Democrat on armed services. He told me they'll have to work hard to shore up support in the coming months. Now, the U.S. already has provided around $76 billion since the Russian invasion 18 months ago. That's out of $113 billion authorized by Congress. Now, the Biden administration, Ari, is seeking another $40 billion, most of that for military aid.
And Brian, when you talk to people in Ukraine, how aware are they that there is not a consensus here in the U.S., and what would it mean for them if the U.S. did cut aid or tried to force Ukraine to accept a peace deal that gave Russia part of the country?
Yeah, Ari, people here are watching this really closely, and they say any big drawback by the U.S. would be devastating. You know, they've paid an enormous human price resisting Russia's invasion. Also, civilian populations have suffered these very well-documented war crimes. But it's not only Ukrainians watching this debate in the U.S. You know, right now the U.S. leads a big coalition against Moscow. You know, countries like Bulgaria and Poland that are relying on Washington's leadership. If we pulled the plug in Ukraine, it would potentially unravel that coalition. Also important to point out that the U.S. isn't only countering Russia here in Ukraine. Russia's opposed U.S. interests for years in Africa, the Middle East, and in cyberspace. So, you know, giving Putin a win, as Ramaswamy described it, that would resonate well beyond the war zone where I am now.
We've been hearing for months about what a struggle Ukraine's counteroffensive has been. Tom, could that failure to make quick, decisive advances on the battlefield further erode U.S. support?
No, I think it could. And really from the beginning, Ari, there were doubts in the Pentagon about how much Ukraine could achieve in this counteroffensive by the fall. People I talked with suggested only modest gains. Now, the goal, of course, in the south is to break the so-called land bridge between Russia and Crimea. That would be a huge achievement and isolate Crimea, Putin's big prize. But so far, the Ukrainians have been making some gains, but face 3 lines of Russian defenses that are formidable. Landmines are the big problem, tens of thousands of them. Now, the U.S. and Britain have told Ukraine, you're spreading your forces too thin along the front line, and you have to concentrate those troops for a big push, a big punch in the south, using the Western-trained troops to, again, break that land bridge. We'll see if they take that advice, and officials say time is of the essence because when the fall comes, the rains come, and everything just slows down.
Brian, you've been near the front lines. What do the Ukrainians tell you about how their counteroffensive is going?
Yeah, they acknowledge that it's hard. I was with Ukraine's defense minister, Alexei Reznikov, this week, and he said, yeah, things are slow. The Russians are actually on the offensive near where I'm at now. Russian troops attacking a Ukrainian city called Kupiansk, triggering a new wave of refugees. Reznikov dismissed that battle as an effort to distract Ukraine and divert troops. It's also worth saying the Ukrainians, while they're struggling right now, they do continue to score small victories. In the last 24 hours, we saw an amphibious assault, Ukrainian officials say was carried out by their commandos in Russian-occupied Crimea. So while the big fight is grinding and costly, Ukrainians say they are still landing significant blows.
And Tom, does that square with what you're hearing from military and other sources in the U.S.?
Well, there were mixed messages again, but a Washington think tank is following all this close. So the Institute for the Study of War, they're pretty optimistic about the situation and believe the Ukrainians could soon threaten that second line of Russian defenses, the second of 3. But again, we'll just have to see. Now, Congressman Adam Smith told me he's neither pessimistic nor optimistic about the counteroffensive. He said the Ukrainians have well-trained troops, and this will all take a lot of time. But again, if there's little progress by late fall, it will only raise more questions about continued support, especially as a presidential campaign heats up.
That is NPR's Brian Mann in Kharkiv, Ukraine, and Pentagon correspondent Tom Bowman here in the studio. Thank you both.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
This is NPR News.
Support for KGOU provided by listeners like you, making a financial investment in this station to keep in-depth news, information, and entertainment programs funded and available to all. Ways to contribute are at the red donate button at kgou.org.
Never miss the deepest reporting from KGOU, State Impact Oklahoma, and NPR. Our Wavelengths email newsletter lands in your inbox once a week. Subscribe from the homepage at kgou.org.
Rafael Laverine traveled from Tijuana, Mexico to Williamsport, Pennsylvania. He went for his son.
I feel very proud and grateful to God because he brings the opportunity, and I'm so happy.
Going to the Little League World Series on the next Morning Edition from NPR News.
Start the day with Morning Edition on KGOU this Friday and each weekday morning from 5 to 9.
It's All Things Considered. Considered. From NPR News, I'm Ari Shapiro.
And I'm Elsa Chang. LA Times reporter Suzanne Russ didn't realize the extent of her plastic consumption until she started to keep a log.
The sort of overwhelming amount of plastic around us sort of blew me away, and it really required just sitting down and chronicling.
First, the newscast.
Live from NPR News in Culver City, California, I'm Dwayne Brown. In Georgia, former President Donald Trump is expected to be booked at the Fulton County Jail in less than an hour. NPR's Windsor Johnson says Trump is expected to turn himself in to authorities after he was indicted for his alleged efforts to overturn the state's 2020 election results.
Security is expected to be tight around the Fulton County Jail, where Trump will be booked. The sheriff has said the former president's processing will be like any other, with a mugshot. Earlier this week, Trump's legal team signed off on a $200,000 bond. As part of that deal, the judge in the case has ordered Trump to refrain from intimidating witnesses, specifically on social media. Trump and his 18 co-defendants, including his former personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, and former White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, are facing a litany of criminal charges, including racketeering. Windsor Johnston, NPR News.
The type of aircraft that crashed in Russia yesterday with Wagner mercenary leader Yevgeny Prigozhin listed on board was known for its good safety record. NPR's Carrie Kahn has more.
The Embraer executive jet known as the Legacy 600 was built back in 2007, but in 2019 fell under U.S. sanctions, a year after Wagner employees bought the private aircraft. The U.S. sanctioned Wagner head Prigozhin for attempting to influence the U.S. 2018 elections. In a statement, Embraer, based in Brazil, said it had not been providing service or spare parts to Russia since 2019 because of the sanctions. The Legacy 600 jet has been involved in only one recorded accident, a mid-air collision with a passenger jet back in 2006 in Brazil. A Brazilian Air Force report blamed faulty communications and pilot error for the deadly crash. An Embraer spokesman told NPR it had no further information when asked whether Embraer will assist Russia.
From the KGOU studios in Norman, I'm Deborah Ashar. Tarantulas are making their move across Oklahoma. State Impact's Brittany Cordera reports the arachnids could be around through October.
Brown tarantulas usually live in arid desert regions and sometimes in damp forests. Once the summer starts cooling off into fall, males migrate hundreds of miles across Oklahoma to find a mate. According to the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation, that's when Oklahomans are likely to see them near residential buildings. The department says the arachnids are not clear. In fact, if the tarantulas are larger, that could be a good sign of a healthier environment in the state. A typical brown tarantula can weigh between 1 and 3 ounces with a leg span up to 45 inches long. The brown tarantula is more likely to be seen in the western part of the state, but can be seen everywhere this time of year. If you see some crawling around, the Department of Conservation recommends observing them from a distance. For State Impact, I'm Brittany Cordera.
Oklahoma State University has covered windows on 2 of its biggest buildings with polka dots to protect birds. We get details from Oklahoma Public Media Exchange's Grayson Wheeler.
Up to 1 billion birds die each year after flying into windows. That's according to research from Scott Loss, who studied bird collisions across the country and on OSU's campus.
Some of the species that fly with buildings here in town on campus and around Oklahoma are in really steep decline.
As you'd expect, lots of birds die from hitting dazzling glass skyscrapers. But Loss says we shouldn't underestimate how much smaller buildings contribute to the death.
We have hundreds of millions of individual residences in this country, and even if each of those kills 1 or 2 birds per year on average, it adds up.
As part of a project spearheaded by Loss and his colleague Tim O'Connell, OSU paid $78,000 to cover its most collision-prone windows in a dotted film that lets birds know there's a hard surface there.
Gripped the nation.
The government was in the throes of a communist panic, and before long, it became a panic about LGBTQ people working in government.
Are there homosexuals in government agencies? And do they pose a threat to national security?
On the next Throughline from NPR,
The Lavender Scare.
Your Throughline this Thursday evening at 8.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Indeed, a hiring platform designed to streamline the hiring process. Indeed works to help businesses attract, interview, and hire candidates in one place. More at Indeed.com/NPR. From BritBox, streaming new and original British series starring Succession's Matthew Fadden and Game of Thrones' Gemma Whelan. Available at BritBox.com/NPR. And from the sustaining members of this NPR station.
It's All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Ari Shapiro in Washington.
And I'm Elsa Chang in Culver City, California. Time now for this week's Science Roundup from our friends at NPR's Shortwave Podcast, Regina Barber and Aaron Scott. Hello to both of you.
Hey, Elsa.
Hello, hello. Okay, so you have brought us 3 recent science stories that grabbed your attention. What are we looking at this week?
How about lessons from wildfires, but from 13,000 years ago?
And turning brain activity into rock music.
Like it.
And of course, moon landings, one successful and one not so much.
Love it. Okay, let's journey into space first and start with those moon landings. What happened this week?
So we just had 2 countries, Russia and India, attempt to land robotic probes on the moon within days of each other. Russia was first. It tried over the weekend and it failed, adding to the suspense if India would succeed. Then Wednesday, India did it. Its probe landed close to the moon's south pole, and this region of the moon is just really fascinating.
What's so special about this area of the moon?
So our NPR colleague Jeff Brumfield has been reporting on this story, and he says that this region is near where craters on the moon are in permanent darkness, and scientists hope that we'll find frozen water there. And of course, water is a key resource that could potentially be used for future missions, as you know, drinking water for astronauts, of course, but also the hydrogen and the oxygen that make up water could be broken up for rocket fuel or for breathable air.
Yeah, and the moon's south pole is a popular place. China is planning a mission there, and the U.S. wants to send humans there as a part of the Artemis program.
Huh. Well, like you said, Russia failed in their mission. Do we have any idea of why India was successful here?
Well, this Russian mission was the first to go back to the moon since the days of the Soviet Union. They spent decades planning and building this lander because it was proven Soviet design. But as it was preparing to touch down, the Russians lost contact with it. And when it comes to India, this is actually the country's second attempt at the moon landing after it crashed a lander in 2019.
So the trouble is, it's really hard to land on the moon, especially for a probe being steered by a robot. There's basically no atmosphere, so the probe can't gently float down on a parachute like on Mars. They have to use thrusters, and that involves a lot of sophisticated calculations that can be challenging for robots, despite all their fancy sensors. It was actually partly a thruster issue that contributed to India's crash in 2019. And so India's engineers learned from that. They beefed up the probe's software and the hardware, and that likely played a role in their successful landing this time.
Okay, well, next up, Aaron, you are moving us from a dark area on the moon to the band that made the album Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd. Did you see that in there? Did you like that transition?
I got that. Yes, indeed. We are doing Pink Floyd and brain science. A team of scientists wanted to know if they could recreate a Pink Floyd song that someone is listening to just by observing their brain activity.
Wait, like mind reading?
Yeah, pretty close. Elsa, I'm guessing you know this song.
All in all it was just a break in the wall.
Is that the one that goes, we don't need no education?
Yes. Pink Floyd's Another Brick in the Wall. Nicely done.
Thank you.
So what happened is a team led by researchers at the University of California, Berkeley, played this song to some epileptic patients who had a bunch of electrodes wired into their brain. Principal investigator Bob Knight explained that it was then like watching a pianist play a piano and reconstructing the song from what keys they played.
We're treating the electrodes in a way like piano keys. The sound comes in, goes to your auditory regions, activates the brain cells, they generate an electric field, we record that electric field, that's our piano key.
Then the researchers fed all the data from those electrode piano keys into a machine learning program to see if they could reconstruct what the patients were hearing. And this is what they got. says it would have been a lot more clear if they had more electrodes in each patient. But the Berkeley team thinks that this is really the first time that scientists have been able to reconstruct how the brain hears musical elements like melody and rhythm and intonation just from the neural signals.
I mean, I get it's a neat part of science, but does it have any practical implications?
It does. The long-term goal is an implantable speech device so that people who have trouble speaking because of something like ALS or a stroke can communicate through the device just by thinking about what they want to say. And Bob says being able to reconstruct music could improve some of these existing devices, which are really quite robotic.
It would be like, I love you, as opposed to I love you. And I think music, because of its prosodic, emotional, melodic elements, will actually make an eventual implantable assistive device more...
All right, thank you, Aaron. Let's turn to the last story. Gina, so much of the world right now is with these devastating wildfires, but I understand that you have brought us a story about fires from thousands of years ago.
Yeah, 13,000 years ago. So there's this new study published in Science last week that touches on a debate that's been raging for over 100 years. What caused one of the major extinction events that wiped out large mammals in North America, like dire wolves, North American camels, and the saber-toothed cat?
How did they figure this out?
So they went to the La Brea tar pits in Southern California, these like bubbling pools of tar that animals have been getting stuck in for thousands of years. And this creates fossils that researchers can study today. These scientists dated and analyzed 172 specimens from 7 extinct species and one that's actually still around, coyotes. And they looked at environmental data from that same time period to see if there were any links between animals dying off and their environment.
So what did all these fossils tell them about the extinction?
So I talked to one of the authors of the paper, paleontologist and evolutionary biologist F. Robin O'Keefe, and he said that after looking at the data, there was a clear overlap between mass deaths and wildfires that just jumped out.
It was like a line in the sand. I thought we would see a slow climb going down because people are getting more confident, but that's not what happened. It was kind of a train wreck.
A train wreck because there was such a massive die-off.
Wait, so how could they tell that fires in particular caused this massive extinction?
Well, the team could infer wildfire activity by looking at charcoal accumulation, and this was in core samples taken from Lake Elsinore in California. They saw an increase of charcoal 30-fold that corresponded to the time Robin said there was a sharp disappearance of species.
So fascinating. Can this tell us anything about the fires that are happening now?
Yeah, well, Robin says scientists like him are concerned because they've seen this before. A paleoecologist that didn't work on this study, named Anthony Barnosky, went even further by saying, quote, "What we are seeing today, increasing human pressures combined with and actually causing climate change, is like this lesson from the past on steroids."
Jeez. Okay, that is Regina Barber and Aaron Scott, NPR's science podcast, Shortwave, where you can learn about new discoveries, everyday mysteries, and the science behind the headlines. Gina and Aaron, thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Elsa.
Thank you.
You're listening to All Things Considered from NPR News. Across the country, kids are heading back to school, and that looks different in different places. Last year, a small district in Alaska changed its whole calendar so kids could spend more time learning about the culture and traditions of living off the land. Evan Erickson of member station KYUK reports.
It's an overcast day this summer in the village of Akiachuk on the Kuskokwim River, about 70 miles inland from the Bering Sea. 5 elementary school kids are drifting along on a skiff with a couple of adults. Everybody is focused on a series of red and white buoys attached to an end.
That red one right here in front of us, it's moving.
This is the school's summer culture camp. The kids are learning about traditional Yupik native ways, living in harmony with the land and the values of sharing food, friendship, and knowledge. Today, in the boat with their principal, they're learning to fish for salmon. Populations of several species of salmon on this river have crashed, and this is a rare window when harvesting them with drift nets is allowed.
That's a king salmon.